Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody tonight. Good crowd. Good crowd tonight. Started out a little bit dreary, but ended up to be a pretty nice day, didn't it? Where's my farmers out there?
Farmers, carpenter.
Huh? Well, I was going to make the comment that farmers are probably itching to start turning some dirt here pretty soon. Being an agrarian community, but carpenters swing hammers all year long, don't they? And we appreciate you for that. And all the other carpenters too. Or at least pull that trigger, however you do it. We're continuing the study of the life of Christ, and we're in the Sermon on the Mount. I forgot how many lessons are in this yearly study. I think it's about 150. We're on lesson 29 tonight. All right. We've been talking Sermon on the Mount for, 7 or 8, 10 lessons. I just want to reiterate a couple of things before we get into what we're going to talk about tonight, and that is matters of the heart. There's a theologian named John Stott, and he wrote this about the Sermon on the Mount. He said, "The Sermon on the Mount is probably the best known part of the teaching of Jesus, though arguably it's the least understood and certainly is the least obeyed. It's the nearest thing to a manifesto that he ever muttered, for it is his own description of what he wanted his followers to be and to do." All right, think about that. To be and to do. Another theologian said, his name's E. Stanley Jones, said this. He said, "The greatest need of modern Christianity is the rediscovery of the Sermon on the Mount as the only practical way to live." I find that statement very poignant and very interesting. I couldn't agree more with him on that, especially when in my life. A way to practice to live my life is what he's saying. Harvey Scott called it the Constitution. We're Americans. We love the Constitution, don't we? I mean, a lot of us do, I guess. The Constitution of Christianity, if we live by that, if we live by the Sermon on the Mount. 2 observations I've got on these statements, and then we'll move right on. The Sermon on the Mount is not only commands to be followed and choices to be made, which it is, which we've been talking about. But the Sermon on the Mount, as you look at it as a whole, it's a picture of what it looks like to live in the kingdom of God, in the kingdom of heaven. It's a picture of what right looks like. If you're reading what he is saying to do, that's the example that he lived it, he told us. But that's what it looks like. It's a picture of what we're to follow. The Sermon on the Mount. The second thing I see out of that is these teachings require a deliberate action. Do you know why they require a deliberate action? It's because it's not in my nature to pray for my enemies. It's not in my nature not to want to chase after shiny things. It's not in my nature to discipline myself for things like prayer. It's not in my nature to give, to be generous, which we're going to talk about tonight. These are learned things that we have to practice to cultivate, and it's just deliberate. We have to make up our minds that we're going to do it, and we have to keep it in the forefront of our minds because we don't just do it on accident, these things. But tonight we're going to continue our study. If you want to turn over to Matthew chapter 6, we're going to be reading verses 16 through 24. And the question I'll ask before our discussion tonight is, where is your heart? That's what the whole study is about. Where is your heart? And the question is, who has your heart? Or what has a hold of my heart, of our hearts? Tonight we're going to look at that. What's even meant by that question? But the first thing we're going to talk about, we're going to continue the discussion that Chris and Andy talked about on Sunday. We're going to talk about fasting just for a few minutes. Okay? We're going to talk about fasting. Let's see. we talked about giving and praying and the reasons that we should do this. That it should not be done to satisfy the interests of men, but it ought to be done to please God. Remember, for the right reasons we do these things. That's why we hide ourselves to do these things. We don't do them so we can receive praise from other people over them. It's the only way it's acceptable. So we'll go ahead and read it. We'll start. Susan, would you start over there? And we'll read 16 through 18, please. One apiece.
Moreover, when you fast, be not as hypocrites of a sad countenance, but for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward.
But thou, when thou fast, anoint thy head, and wash thy face.
So that your fasting will not be noticed by people, but by your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you.
Thanks. That's good. We'll start with you in a minute when we start talking about treasures there, Brittany. What's fasting? We've talked, I think we had a class on this not more than a few months ago. Somebody tell me what fasting is.
Not eating for a period of time, to set aside that time to pray and meditate on God.
There's some wisdom, exactly, Joe. There's some wisdom out there that says, in Christianity, that says fasting is anything you want to abstain from. If you want to abstain from TV, then that's fasting from TV. Well, I'm here to tell you right now, that is not what biblical fasting is talking about. Somebody has contrived that. Because every time they talk about it in the New and Old Testament, it has to do with food and or water. The Greek translation for that is nestio. Nestio, that's what Paul said. That's what Paul did. And what that means is to abstain from food. If you look up in the Hebrew for that, if you go back, if you have a Strong's and you go look and you type on fasting in the Old Testament, it says T-S-O-M, psalm, and what it'll say is fasting right next to it. Nestio. But if you do a deeper study, what it means is to cover your mouth. To cover your mouth. So what they're talking about is abstaining either partially or fully from food and or water for a period of time. Obviously, if it's total abstinence, it's going to be a shorter period of time. However, Moses went without both for how long? He was with God, though. I mean, he was with... Did he need food? He was with God.
He had the ultimate food, right?
That's right. That's right. He sure did. Jesus fasted. Paul fasted. The early church elders fasted. And Joe hit the purpose of it. Is fasting a law? Was fasting a law in the Old Testament?
Not that I'm aware of.
It was not. It was not a law. It was not in the Levitical law to be enforced as such. However, fasting was prescribed at several points and through several prophets. If you go back and you look at Leviticus chapter 16, 29, and 31, it's talking about setting aside the Day of Atonement. It said, "This shall be a permanent statute for you, that in the 7th month, 10th day, you shall humble your souls." Humble your souls. And again, it says it in verse 31. If you pair that with what the prophet Ezra says in Ezra 8:21, it says, "Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river of Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before God." So what is fasting? Fasting is a weakening of your body. You take food and water out of it, it's a weakening of your body to put you below God. It's taken that, and it's often paired with prayer. We see that. That's scriptural. We see that. It's taking food out and putting God in. Okay? So it's not just going without food and water. It's not just a diet that you can use to control your metabolism, weight, whatever it is. It's actually meant to have an effect spiritually to bring us closer to God, and it's often paired with prayer. It is not done so that somebody will know you're fasting. Let me ask you a question. If you look awful and it looks painful, what kind of witness are you for Christ? I'd think so, wouldn't you? I would. I would think, who wants to be like Clint if he looks so awful while he's fasting? I don't want to do that. Anoint your head. Comb your hair. Brush your teeth while you're fasting. Make it look like you're not doing it. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego did a partial fast for, I forgot, 10 to 20 days, somewhere along in there. What did they look like at the end of it?
Apparently they look pretty good.
They look better than all the rest of them. Okay, so I'm not saying that that's why we do it. Okay, we do it to get a better experience with God. Should we do it today? Should we do it today? Is it a law for us today?
I don't think it's a law, but I think it's a good practice.
What? Let me ask you, were they humans in a relationship with God? Are we humans in relationship with God? Why would it have any other effect on us than it would them in antiquity? I'm not telling everybody you need to go out and fast. I mean, everybody needs to evaluate their health status and things like that. But I believe in my heart that practicing things like this will have a positive effect in our spiritual lives.
In the New Testament, certain demons could only be dealt with by prayer and fasting.
That's right. That's right.
We have demons today that we don't realize. Sometimes we need to just pray. That's what we need to do.
That's right, Joe. Good point. Yes, sir.
If we lean on God, when we need help, if we lean on that, like he's saying here, we're thinking toward God more than anything else. That's what the idea I have of fasting is putting God first in everything. That's about food, about water, but in one sense it says here that put God first and He'll take care of you.
What are the three basic needs that we're taught? Food, clothing, shelter. What's a greater need than food? I mean, if you're without water for 3 days, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Any survival school will tell you that. When we abstain from these things sincerely and with prayer, we rely on His strength. We pull Him in, and and we'll talk about this, priorities here in a second, with our heart. We do that.
What like I'm doing right now, leaning on God for strength. Mary's in the hospital now, and she's not in pain though. She broke her thigh. Don't know how, but I'm leaning on God right now for strength and for this family right here. I need the love of God. Otherwise I'd be crying right now. But then what I'm trying to get across here is that the pain of the world is taken care of by our love for God and for each other. We can survive the atrocities of the world by loving each other and God first.
Well, draw near to God, and what? He will draw near to you.
Yes.
This is one way to do it. One way to do it. Anybody got any other comments? I need to move on. Does anybody have any other comments on fasting?
I just noticed that this, it's the same scenario with prayer. Don't do it for be seen of men.
It is, yeah.
Because, that's why you do it, that's the only reward you get. But if you do it secret, He rewards you openly. That same promise comes to you back. Isn't that in there?
It is. It is.
There's a reward in
And it's interesting, the wording is when you fast. It's not if you fast. The wording is when you fast. But it is. It's the same. It's basically a continuation of the same thought with giving, praying, and then fasting. So we do it insincerely, or when we do it for the notice of others. I knew I had a squadron mate that used to fast every Wednesday. He would fast from Tuesday evening all the way until Wednesday evening after they had Bible study. I think he was just trying to give me an example. I don't know why else he would tell me that, but I think he was trying to. I think he was sharing. I don't think he was bragging. I think he was sharing with me that, hey, you can do this and you can draw closer to God. I think he's trying to give me a testimony or a witness. He told me nonetheless. Let's move on. Treasure, Matthew 6:19 through 21. Let's go ahead and read that. Brittany, you want to go ahead?
Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal.
But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal.
For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
The eye is a lamp of the body. If the eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light.
We'll stop right there. We'll get that here in a second. So what's that? What's he saying there? We're getting into matters of the heart now. And in verses 19 through 24, he hits three things here. He hits your priorities. He hits what our priorities are. He hits our attitudes or how we see things, and that's what he's going to talk about with the eye being the lamp of the body. And then he's going to hit who our master is. And these three things are going to they're going to come together, they're going to determine the disposition of our heart. So you can look at these three things and you can say, yeah, my heart's in the right spot, or I need to work on this or that. Okay, so these three things determine the disposition of your heart. What does he mean by where your treasure is, your heart will be also?
Well, it's just a simple principle that things that you invest your money in, those things are going to be the things you're thinking about more than anything else.
Whatever you think is important, that's going to be your top priority, correct?
valuable.
Those things that you treasure, those things that you think are valuable, that's where you're going to rack and stack up at the top. It's human. That's what we do. That's human nature. Okay, we're wired that way. We just got to get that priority right. Christ is challenging in this passage to store up our treasures in heaven where God is. And let me ask you, how exactly do we do that? Because we want to store up for the things that we can feel, touch, taste, smell, all that, the temporal things. How do we do what he wants us to do and store up treasures that are in heaven?
I think the answer is in 1 Timothy chapter 6.
Do you have that, Joe? If you've got it, I want you to read it. And Paul gives us a good glimpse of what he's talking about in that passage.
Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap into many foolish, harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people, ignorant of money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves into the grief. That's not the one I'm looking for.
18, 19.
18, okay. Command them to do good and to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life.
Not the only way to do it, but he gives us two very simple instructions there. Did y'all hear what they were? Be rich in good deeds. He didn't say do good, which Paul says in a lot. That's one of his things. Do good things. But what he says is be rich in good deeds. That means make your life about doing good things, especially for others. All right. The second thing is being generous and willing to share. But here's the problem with that. Here's the problem with me and sharing. You want me to tell you what it is real fast? You don't? You don't have to live. Here's my problem with being generous. Because there's money coming in and everybody's got their hand out. Especially the federal and state government. And I pay and I give and I throw money at them. And I don't think they do very well with it. And that's what they're supposed to, they're supposed to be taking care of these people on the streets, right? Well, Chris hit it the other day in his class. If y'all listen to that class, he hit a very poignant and salient point, and here's what it is. The state has taken the role of the church. Uncle Sam has become mom and dad. And that's not Uncle Sam's priority. Uncle Sam's priority is to defend us and to make sure infrastructure and legal and fair play and everything's on the level playing field, right? Now, he's making sure that people get what they need in medical care and food and this and that. And it's like Chris said, people are called out of the shadows. They have to stand up and be present to receive that, and that's not an honor to them. He had a great good talk on it the other day. Made me think about it. But that's our job. That's what he wants us to do, is to share. Because he gives to us. He gives to us so we can share. Be generous with people. It says where moth and rust destroy. I was reading about this, and they were talking about the banking system it's not today like it was in antiquity. Their possessions were actual, their money was actual metals and different things that were valuable that they would hide because robbers and, heaven forbid you were on a road and you didn't have protection because they'd take it all on certain roads. Those things rust. They disintegrate. They get stolen. Those treasures that we store up here on earth. Today, where's your money? Is it in a jar in your house? Is it underneath the loaf of bread? It's not. It's electrons floating around, isn't it? Most people's assets are floating around in the ether somewhere. You may be invested in a company and you might be able to get some cash in a few days, weeks, but most of what you have is floating around in the cloud. That's kind of scary, isn't it? I mean, is that scary to you?
Especially with all the cyber attacks.
And Andy could talk to us about that, couldn't he? There's a lot of chicanery going on in the cyber world, isn't there? Is the cyber world ethical?
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying
It's neither ethical or non-ethical. It just is.
It's the people who transact in it, right? That's the point. And if a man's heart is bad, your electrons could end up somewhere that they don't need to be, and they're no longer your electrons. They're somebody else's Bitcoin or whatever it is. So we're kind of not under the same banking system, but the principle still applies. Temporary nature of things versus the eternal nature of what we're dealing with our possessions. He's not saying not to save for the future. He was saying that a Christian garnering possessions and wealth as your purpose is the wrong priority. That's what he's saying. If possessions, wealth, stuff is what we are trying to do, then our priority's out of whack. That's basically what he's saying there. But you know what? I was thinking about it. If I won the lottery, I'd do good stuff with it. You ever see those You ever see those people that the shows that they win the lottery and they win $400 million and 3 years later they don't have any of it and their lives are wrecked? But here's the difference. If I won it, I'd do good things with it. So it's okay for me to have that priority, just not anybody else. All right? I'll think about things like that. Let's take an eye exam real quick. Let's see, Matthew chapter 6, verse 22 and 23. Where are we? Mr. Bowers, would you just go ahead and read both of those?
Which one is it?
Matthew 6, 22 and 23.
The light of the body is the eye. Therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Thine eye be evil, thy whole body shall be full of darkness. Therefore the light that is in thee be darkness. How great is that darkness?
Y'all understand that? Is that? I had to really study to finally get, and I'm not sure I've still got a good handle on what they're trying to say right there. We don't use this analogy in our society today. We really don't. We say other things around it that were probably derived, like somebody tells you something, or they say, "What do you think about it?" And they'll say, "Well, it depends on how you look at it. Depends on how you look at it. It's your attitude." If we have a good eye, so the eye works on light. Light's got to reflect off something in the eye, and a biologist or a scientist can tell you exactly how to do it. I can't. All I know is that it works on light, and I see things. God made it that way. But if my eye is good, if I've got a good eye, then I can see clearly. I can see. I've got a good lamp. If I have a good heart, it's the same way to the soul. If I have a good heart, then I can see things clearly spiritually in order to make the right spiritual decisions and maneuver correctly in the spiritual realm. All right? Worldview. You know, what is that? What is a worldview? It's how you look at things. You hear in the Christian worldview, that's the way we should be seeing everything through a set of Christian glasses. That should be our worldview. It should be how we look at things in accordance with this passage.
I think always, God is light. God is the source of light. God is what we look at. We need light to see things. Darkness is evil. Darkness is where you get lost in. Darkness is looking away from God. But light has always been referred to the likeness of God. And the devil is always the opposite of darkness of the world.
That's a good observation. If you were to turn over to Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 9, in the NASB it would say, "He who is generous will be blessed." But if you were to turn over in the King James Version, it would say, "He who has a bountiful eye will be blessed." He who sees things clearly. If you turn over to the New King James, I think it says generous eye, which means he who gets plenty of light in his eye can see things clearly.
It's got a footnote that says good eye.
Good eye.
Got a good eye.
That's right.
We use that for playing baseball or shooting the target.
That's right. We do. Yeah. If they're standing at the plate and they don't swing and it's a ball, we say what?
Good eye.
Good eye. Good eye. It means they saw it well. They saw it well. And those guys can see within like a half inch out there. It's amazing what they can do.
The umpires can. Oh wait, the umpires can't. The guys in the stadium.
The batter. I can. I'm on TV. Proverbs 28:22 in contrast says, "A man with an evil eye hastens after wealth and doesn't know what will come upon him." And that's what you were talking about, is a man who doesn't see God as light, a man who denies that, okay, has a bad eye. That means, you know, the blind leading the blind. You know, you are in darkness. You know, that's a common theme in New Testament Scripture, especially Jesus talking about the Pharisees and things like that. The blind leading the blind. It means they can't see. They can't maneuver in the spiritual realm because they've got a bad eye. And how great is the darkness? Darkness is darkness. It means bad. All right.
You can't function in darkness.
If a man's heart's good, it's spiritual light. If his heart is bad, spiritual darkness. Let's go through the last one and then we'll do a quick summation. We got about 3 or 4 minutes left. Last one we'll talk about is who our master is. Who's next? One of you boys want to read it? Or one of you there? Gavin, would you read it? 6:24. One verse only.
No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money.
Anybody ever had, like at work, 2 bosses? Tony, what did you think about it? I mean, you probably like both of them, but there's always one. What do you think?
It causes stress at times.
It does. What if one of those bosses, and both of them being good, well-intentioned, they take your 1 hour time slot and one of them tells you to be doing this, and the other one, well-intentioned, says to be doing that. How does that work out?
That's the stress.
It is. It's stressful, isn't it? It's stressful. What about wives? What about wives?
Good, we only have one.
I ain't touching that with a 10-foot pole. But anyway, you're not going to lure me into that. What about wives?
Wives?
What about is your dad your boss or your husband? No, let's not do that. Let's do husbands. Let's do husbands, because that is your mom your boss or is your wife your boss?
God is
Huh?
God.
Good answer, Joe. I'm not saying there's not a role for both of them, but what I'm saying is if you're trying to please both when they're both pulling like this, it's not good for you. That's why.
Mama's the boss. You're not going to be married very long.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It's hard to serve 2 masters, especially if their demands contradict each other. It's talking about mammon here, Chaldean word for money. All right.
Yeah, he's being more specific.
Why money? Why money though? Why money?
It gets everybody's attention.
It's such a power. Money is such a powerful draw on people. It's got such power. And as numbers go up, so does the power. But as money goes up, problems go up. Especially if we're chasing it. If we're chasing it, things just seem to go very badly when it comes to money.
That good eye.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's the speck in your eye or the log in your eye, either one. Jesus was talking about.
10 Commandments, Exodus 20 and verse 3 says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." The gods just happens to be a little g. Paul said, what about little g gods? No,
That's not necessarily idol, like most people think. That's anything that'll draw you.
there's no such thing. Paul's like, there's no such thing as, we know there's no such thing as these little gods that the little idols that they're talking about. What he's talking about, anything that takes our attention away from the only. He also said in Exodus 34:14, he gave himself a name. You know what that name was? Jealous. And we think of jealous in a negative connotation, don't we? Like he's just jealous. You know, we think that's not what that means here. What that means is only. Because he is the only. There are no other gods. Anything else that you chase after besides him is going to end up at the end of the track. You know, you can ride the trash truck, just don't ride it all the way to the dump, right? You can get off of it at any time. And how do you do that? You make sure your master is God. He's the only. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul. Not partial. It's all. I mean, he doesn't share, I guess is what I'm saying. He gives provision for other things too, but he doesn't share your loyalties with anything else. And that's very hard for me, especially. Treasure, vision, Whom you serve, that's your priorities, your envies, your wants, your desires, and your God or gods. If you have a bad physical heart, you go to the doctor. Your ticker's the center of your being. If it ain't working, ain't nothing working. It's got to get blood everywhere. If you've got a bad physical heart, medicine, surgery, or worse, right? Same way with your spiritual heart as the wind of your soul. You only live once. Have y'all ever seen that YOLO? You only live once? What does that normally mean? You only live once, so what? Do whatever you want to do.
Live it up.
Live it up. Well, I say you only live it once, so you don't live it up, you live it right. You only got one chance at this. Life is short. Eternity's long. Death is certain. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I think we all know these things. But we've got to make sure our hearts are in the right spot. And if we analyze these teachings of Christ, we can either say, yeah, we're there, or we need to work on this. It gives us direction. It gives us a picture of what right looks like. I think we're out of time. We got time for a couple comments or questions, if anybody wants to make any. That it? All right. Thanks for your attention.